I was in Carrickfergus.
So another 3 minutes to go, and we will be in Downshire for today's episode of Around the Railways. Well folks, we've just arrived in Downshire, which was originally called Downshire Park, but was subsequently renamed Downshire Halt, and is now just simply known as Downshire. Anyway folks, we're just going to go up the accessible pathway here. Nice to see there's a ramp. Some of the stations, as you may know, are not very accessible to wheelchair users. I'm not going to list them all folks, but some of the ones I use on a regular basis, Sydenham being one of the most important ones because it's at the city airport. There's no accessibility for wheelchairs. So yeah, just take a right out of the train station and just keep walking. You will have to cross the road because there's only a footpath on one side of the road. As always folks, you come on the journey with me. Down Donaldson Avenue, if you're coming on foot, take a right out of Downshire train station, walk about 200 metres up the road and you will come to Donaldson Avenue. So this is it folks, right down by the seaside. Andrew Jackson. There you go folks, any of my viewers watching the United States, I'm sure you know this already, but the motto of the United States is E pluribus unum, which means out of many, one. So we're just at the home of parents of the 7th President of the United States. Free admission, what do you think of that? Opening hours Wednesday to Sunday, 11 to 3. Let's go and check it out folks.
These houses were for tenant farmers. Mother and father's bedroom, grandparents' bedroom. These were designated for storage, but in many cases children were stored up there. This is an extension of some description. This room was used as the Methodist meeting house for this area. How did all of these people end up here? Ulster Scots, the term that we all know. In fact, for many of these people, they refer to themselves as Scotch Irish or Scots Irish. County Antrim's a little bit unique in the whole of Ireland. We have had a much longer history just because of our geography with Scotland. So we've had movements for centuries, probably thousands of years back and forward. What led up partially to the plantation of Ulster was Hugh O'Neill, west of the Bann, mainly west of the Bann. Hugh O'Neill's the last true Irish chieftain. However, he had been brought up in the English court in Dublin, so he had very close ties and had very good understanding of English politics. We know that he must have sworn an oath to the English monarchy because his title is Earl of Tyrone. That title, Earl, is English, not Irish. James I, who forgives him on several occasions, becomes very fed up with him. There's a warrant sent for his arrest. He had been involved with the Spanish and trying to assist Spanish in coming to Ireland. What the main deciding factor then in the plantation of Ulster, because he's petitioning the Pope for the funds to return with a Spanish mercenary army to reclaim his lands in Ulster. County Antrim and a little bit of North Down are quite unique in the plantation of Ulster because we were not part of it. And south of Glenarm is under the control of Carrickfergus Castle and Sir Arthur Chichester. So it's under basically English control, so there was no need for a plantation in County Antrim. The majority of these people coming across are Presbyterian, Everything goes well in the early days. The rents increase greatly, and through these two acts they are now having to pay their taxation through a church that they don't believe in or attend. We see this really coming through from 1717 onwards. Between 1717 and 1775, we see a large number of people leave the province of Ulster for America. The 150,000 we can really take away. It was probably closer to 250,000 people left Ulster for America. Pennsylvania was really a Quaker state, and these Presbyterians didn't really want to come under anyone else's control. About 1,000 miles along the Appalachian mountain range, for about 100 miles, 150 miles breadth, somewhere in about 70 to 80% of these people were Scotch-Irish. So whenever we look at the old frontier of America and we see the guys in the buckskins and that's us. We were really the first frontiers people, and we definitely were very much viewed as an ethnic people. We see a lot through the sermons this real belief that they had been granted. This was the Presbyterians' promised land. Think of the change it would have been for these people. You know, maybe 15 acres here that they're renting, and they arrived at a land grant of 200 acres for free in America. Whenever they went out, they had no money to pay for the ship. So they actually had a thing called indentureship, which was you sold yourself to the captain of the ship. Once you arrived in America, they auctioned you for basically 5 years indentureship, 4 to 5 years. Someone would bid on you, and for the next 4 to 5 years you weren't paid. So it's basically slavery. The William that left Newry for Boston in 1766, the height of between the decks was 4'9". This was a 6-week journey. The Providence that left Port Rush for New York, about 200 miles out of New York, she started to sink. So the crew took the only lifeboat, and no one else was ever heard of again. The most frightening one I've came across is the Seaflower. She left Belfast for Philadelphia in 1741, and whenever in Philadelphia the harbour master boarded the ship, he discovered that 6 of the dead had been eaten. And then once they arrived in America, they had to walk to the Appalachians. You know, these were people that probably had never been more than 10 miles away from the little clacking of houses that they were born in. The first really famous Scots-Irishman is Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson's mother, father and 2 brothers were out here on this railway line. Was Jackson born here, born in the ship, whatever? We know he was born in America. His father died 2 weeks before he was born, we think in a timber accident. Many of these communities, because they felt that they had been abused in Ireland, had a chip on their shoulder. So many of them joined on the side of the revolutionary forces. Again, not all, but many did. So Andrew Jackson's an orphan at 13. And then goes through a period that we must just say he's a wild boy. Everything that a teenage boy should not be doing, Andrew Jackson's doing it. This family were the family of John Donaldson, one of the founders of Nashville, and they came from Carnmoney. So Nashville, by the way, is a sister city of Belfast. I have no question in my mind that the Jackson family and the Donaldson family knew each other here long before they ever went to America. and they more or less adopted him. He meets Rachel Donaldson, the daughter of John Donaldson, and they marry. He becomes a very successful lawyer in America. However, then we have the outbreak of the 1812-1815 war. This is actually the Second Revolutionary War, but it hugely impacted by people from here. It was really a British attempt at retaking America. During this war, Andrew Jackson becomes the leading figure, the leading general on the American side. So in 1814, during this war, the British burned down Washington, D.C. and it's burnt down by, I think his title at that time was Colonel Ross for the British, and he was from Ross Trevor, County Down. Andrew Jackson is fighting for the Americans, but he's fighting along with people similar to himself of Ulster descent. Davy Crockett is involved in the 1812 war. Sam Houston, connected mostly with Texas and with the Alamo and all of that. Sam Houston, his family were from Ballynear. Inside 30 minutes, Jackson, 2,000 British killed or wounded under Jackson, and Patterson is 21. It was a whitewash. But the guy that they defeated, the British general at the Battle of New Orleans, was Sir Edward Peckingham. Sir Edward Peckingham was the son of Lord Longford, and they also owned Langford Lodge at Crumlin. This whole 1812-1815 war, I call it the Ulster conflict in America. They were all connected and would have known of each other. Sir Edward Peckingham, that Andrew Jackson defeated at the Battle of New Orleans, this was really a strike to the heart of the British aristocracy, because Sir Edward Peckingham was the brother-in-law of the Duke of Wellington. Well, then he goes into politics and becomes the 7th President of the United States. A very controversial president, but to be honest, a very controversial time. I don't think we can look at the thinking today that we would have of what is humanitarian and the thinking then of what was humanitarian was two totally different things, really. He's the president of Firsts and Onlys. He was the first Democrat president. We can criticise him in many ways today, I'll explain in a moment. He was really a president of the people, there's no doubt about that. He opened the White House up for them, allowed everyone in for a big party. And then Washington DC had never seen anything like it, because these guys are coming from the Appalachians and everywhere to spend time with Jackson. Jackson had to climb out the window and go and stay in a hotel. Someone suggested that to bring in the military to take all of these ruffians out of the White House. I know how to work with these guys. We just offer them free alcohol on the lawn. He is also the first president that there was an assassination attempt on. Unfortunately for the assassin, neither pistol went off. He remains the only president where they had to pull the president off the assassin to save the assassin's life. They became very fearful. He's going to choke him here. He's going to finish him. But it was Davy Crockett that was one of those that pulled the president off the assassin.
So folks, that's right, we are in the US Rangers Museum here in Carrickfergus in the townland of Bonnybefore.
US Rangers Museum. Why on earth is it here? This is the only permanent US Rangers Museum in the world. The reason that it's here is this is their home. They were formed in Carrickfergus in Sunnyland's Army Camp in 19th of June 1942. They remain the only US regiment ever formed off US soil. The reason that they were formed here was this is where many of the personnel, US personnel, were. People tend to forget that before they arrived in England, they arrived here first. We had somewhere in the region of 120,000 US personnel in Northern Ireland during the Second World War. In around 2,500 initially volunteered. Out of that, just over 500 completed training. Sunnylands Camp is where they began, and then they finished their training with the British Commandos in Scotland. Of course, in the early days, there was a lot of rivalry between them, Americans and British, until the Commandos realised these guys are paid a wee bit more than we are, and if you want to get a free beer, you best befriend a ranger. For their very first initial raid, they became a PAL regiment, meaning that it was one British commando, one US ranger working together. So you can see here they went through very rigorous training. The US ambassador came to Carrickfergus to visit them. This is him down in the very bottom picture here. Also, we know that they had a visit from the royal family. There is no photograph of it because it was a secret visit to Northern Ireland. Their motto was Rangers Lead the Way. They're the spearhead regiment for amphibious landings. The first US soldier to be killed in combat in Europe of the Second World War was a US Ranger. Often people will say to you, why do we go to the bother of remembering them? They're only here for a few weeks. Northern Ireland never left them, because the three main major boats that they used for their every amphibious landing were in fact the three Belfast ferries that were suspended in the Second World War and reconfigured as troop carriers. Mm-hmm. The first war bride ship to leave Belfast after the war had 1,800 young women on it going to America, so we must have improved their population too.
The main purpose of today's visit was to visit the Andrew Jackson Homestead and the US Rangers Museum. George, the host, was very informative and told us all about the history of the cottage and Jackson family who left here, so definitely worth a look in if you're into military history and to Ulster Scots history, Ulster Scots American links, that sort of thing. Today's visit is at the Downshire halt on the Larne line. If you're going to be taking advantage of the Sunday day tractor fare, which is £8 by the way, you can visit anywhere in the Northern Ireland network for £8. That's the whole point of the series, and it is open on a Sunday, folks, so some museums are not open on a Sunday. They're open from 11 until 3 o'clock. We're just going to have a look at the big stone here, which is actually a memorial to the site of what would have been the Sunnylands camp. So we're just here at the Sunnylands estate here in Carrickfergus. So I'll just have a look at the stone here, the big stone. To commemorate the founding of the US Rangers Battalion, activated at Sunnylands Camp, Carrickfergus, 19th of June 1942, under the command of Major William O'Darby, thus giving birth to their song, an illustrious tradition in the service of freedom, keeping bright the torch of liberty. Rangers lead the way.